getting up to YouTube. YouTube takes a bit longer than Facebook for some reason.
Testing.
There we go. Cool.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Suffolk Pride's Trans Experiences panel. We're going to have some discussion about transitioning in a rural environment, as well as more issues that currently face the trans community. This is the second in a series of experience panels. So we've already had the mental wellbeing one, which you can view on YouTube or via our Facebook page. We've also got one on sport and a people of colour and minority community experiences panel. They're all going to be live streamed and they'll be recorded as well. So if you can't make them to any of them, that's not a problem. You can always watch it later. It's part of the sort of event calendar. We've got a series of events next weekend, which is very exciting. Obviously, it's not going to be the usual big bash that we'd like to have, but hey, you know, it's going to be next year at this point, I think. But come along, come to the events if you can. The donations from Pay What You Can will be passed on to the charities involved in the panel. Bit of boring housekeeping. Our lovely admin, Dara, will be muting people just to keep everything nice and quiet so we're not disturbed. A few ground rules. Everyone's welcome, equal within this space. So we'll be using everyone's correct names and pronouns. Everyone's will tolerate bigotry and or violence. You will be removed if you are engaging in such things. Obviously, this is a sensitive topic. So, you know, it's possible people may need a couple of moments to collect themselves. And yeah, so on with the show. So let's introduce ourselves. Let's go with alphabetical order. So Dan, where are you from? What are your pronouns?
Hey everyone, my name is Danny James. My pronouns are she, her, and I am based in London, and I've been invited along because I run a charity that supports trans adults called Not a Phase.
Fantastic. And then coming up next, we've got Dara.
Hi, I'm Dara. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the LGBTQ plus officer at the University of Suffolk, and I do the tech stuff for Suffolk Pride.
Dara is our hired geek, and we appreciate him very, very much. I'm Joni. I will be your chairperson for tonight, so I'll be the one kind of introducing the questions. And my pronouns are she, they. I work for the NHS up at the local hospital. And yeah, so without further ado, we'll sort of introduce our panelists. And I just want to have a brief, by way of an introduction. So I'm sure many of you already, however, there may be some issues you're not aware of or the scope of certain issues. So where we're at the moment. So a lot of these statistics give pleasure to really give you. In the last 5 years, reported trans hate crimes have quadrupled. And that's reported hate crimes, not hate crimes that are unreported, which, considering we're a community, that numbers are probably higher. We face an onslaught of articles from print media that are hugely disparaging and generally pretty disgusting. To put perspective, in 2016, the Times printed 6 articles about trans people. In 2020, it was 3.
My parents were very good with not using gender stereotypes as and linking them to gender. And I think that's one of the most important things, is the only way to help youth like discover themselves, discover who they are, understand their own gender identity, is to allow them to play with it more than we allow them to play with it now. There is an encouragement for cis youth to well, not an encouragement, but there is more acceptance for cis youth to play with other gendered toys than there is for trans youth, and I think that's wrong. And I should never be limited to just boys' toys, and a trans girl should never be limited to just girls' toys, and non-binary youth should be able to do whatever they want. And I think also with non-binary youth especially, we need to teach them what it is, because in schools it was never really talked about anyway, but it's definitely, non-binary is definitely the one label that is left out of all conversations. And I think it's important to give them the words they need to describe themselves, and then not come back and say, oh, because it's talked about in schools, it's caused an epidemic of non-binary people. And it's like, there's no such thing as an epidemic of non-binary people. There's just non-binary people. Yeah, that's my piece.
Fantastic, thank you. So over to me. I think when I kind of sat down and read through this question, I think there were three things that really immediately came to mind for me. I think the first one is believe them. If a child, if your child, if a child you know, if they say they're trans, just believe them. Kids know these things, they can. And if they explore gender and play around with gender and find it isn't for them, and actually they are at the gender they're assigned at birth, what's the harm? You know, they may have used a different name and different pronouns for a couple of months or a couple of years even. That's not hurt anybody at all. And in fact, you know, in some ways that knowledge of oneself is super important and super useful. I mean, talking about this issue as well, the other thing, the elephant in the room is, of course, the Bell versus Tavistock case. So I don't know whether everyone's aware of it, but it was a case that was heard in December last year in the High Court, featuring a woman who detransitioned. And the case ultimately tried to, and succeeded at the first go, to state that people under 16 could not consent to puberty blockers as a treatment. Let's talk about puberty blockers for a minute. So again, another elephant in the room. Children are not being offered gender confirming surgery. Children are not being offered cross-sex hormones. So if you are assigned female at birth, that would be testosterone. If you're assigned male at birth, that would be estrogen. Those things are not being offered to children. What is being offered, with a whole load of hoops to jump through, is puberty blockers. Now, these have been used in cis kids for around 5 decades, not an experimental treatment. What those do is they arrest puberty, they prevent puberty. So for me, that would have stopped my voice deepening. It would have stopped me growing so damn large. It would have stopped my facial hair starting to grow and appear. That's what kids are being offered. Now, the Bell Tavistock judgment that came down in December stopped trans kids who were already on that treatment having access to it, because the ruling stated that they couldn't, it didn't pass what's called Gillick competency, which is an understanding of the medical treatment. Now, it's worth noting that the lawyer who brought the Bell Tavistock case to the High Court is a lawyer who has previously fought against abortion provision. And this is the bigger picture here, is that if you can get a case that sets a precedent for trans kids not being able to consent to gender affirming puberty blockers, it rolls on, and it means that people under 16 or under 18 even can't consent to abortion, can't consent to contraception. And that's why we are seeing far-right and evangelical groups from the United States in particular funneling money into anti-trans activism. I think I've kind of gone off the question a bit here. But my point is that trans youth need to be believed, they need to be respected, and we need to ask them what it is that they want. I was not out when I was a kid. I couldn't be out when I was a kid. And yeah, we need to just have this conversation. We need to protect them and give them the opportunity to be believed, the opportunity to be respected. We need to give them the opportunity to have gender affirming healthcare, such as puberty blockers. So Any other kind of thoughts, feelings, and such on this? Anybody?
Yeah, I just want to bounce off the puberty blockers point as well, because I was a trans child that went on puberty blockers. I was one of, at the time, about 360 trans youth that had ever gone on them. And one, I'm fine, I'm still here, I didn't die. And I think the thing that astounds me is it currently takes about 2 years to get an appointment. If a child comes out as trans at my age, not at my age, at the age I came out when I was a child, which was 13, they now currently wouldn't be seen until they were 15. Then I had 6 appointments where they had to confirm that I was transgender and that I could consent to having this medication, which I was then referred for. That was another 6 months. And then it was another 6 months with the endocrine before I got put on that medication. That's so for a person going through that now, that'd be 3 years. That's when they're 16 anyway, but that arguably is way too late. Like, I got them when I was 15 and they didn't do very much. Like, all they did was like kind of stop what was already happening. It didn't prevent anything. And I think that like it's important to note that, like, by delaying this medication, that actually just forcing kids through a puberty they don't want. It's not just if they go on them when they're 16, it's fine, everything will stop. It doesn't work like that. You've gone through puberty at that point. You've experienced most of the major changes that, like, people don't like. Because for trans girls, it would be about 14 when the big major ones like voice dropping happens. And then for trans men, that it's like 12, 13 that all the big major ones happen. So it just causes a lot of distress that's really unnecessary. And I think, like, it's important to note that as well when discussing these cases. Like, we know we want them for a long time.
Yeah, it's not a question of going to your GP and they go, oh yeah, cool, oh yeah, there you go. Like you said, it is a huge number of appointments, and the gap between those appointments become even bigger. I mean, I think there's a message when you see trans kids and their provision of treatment that helps them, and provides solace. I think when you see that treatment taken away, you're seeing a very distinct message being sent, and that message is to trans kids who are in the closet: stay in there, stay in the closet. And that's why even discussing the dog whistle of what about the children and all of the grossness around that, where the community gets accused of transing children. Believe them, respect them, ask them what they need. It's pretty simple, really. Did you have anything to add, Danny?
Not so much, to be honest. It's not that I avoid conversations about trans youth, but I came out when I was 17, and my interaction with youth has been minimal. Youth overall, it's not just trans youth. So I try not to get too involved in conversations that I can't directly pull from. The organization I run is for trans adults as well, so it's like something that I will always be in support of, but I don't feel necessarily well versed enough to debate.
That's absolutely fair enough. That's fair enough. I came out 23 myself. I came out a lot later, and as a trans person, I went through childhood knowing I had to be really damn quiet about this whole gender dysphoria thing. And I think it's quite interesting because the three of us have sort of come at some very different angles, which is really, really, really interesting and really good. Like, I find it really heartening to see that there are trans kids, in greater number than there were when I was a kid, and that some kids feel able to speak to their experience of gender and being and able to come out, and you know, there are supportive parents out there who, you know, engage with it in a positive manner and let them be who they are. That's really refreshing to hear, and see. Yeah. Any final thoughts, or should we move on to the next question? Oh, okay, cool. So the next question is a big one. It is, how do we fight transphobia in the UK? I think what we'll do this time is we won't go in alphabetical order. We'll go in. Dara, do you want to take this one first? You okay to jump in on this?
Yep, sure. I'll give it a go anyway. I think that one of the biggest issues about transphobia in the UK is it's very strong. There's so much organization, as Joni mentioned earlier. They have so much money funneled into them from organizations, that although they are very small in number, although it doesn't seem like that on Twitter, they are very small in number in their organizations. They have so much support in structuring themselves that they seem very organized, and it gets them places that they shouldn't ever have access to. The fact that they're being able to talk to the government as knowledgeable on trans rights when they've only existed for 6 weeks and haven't had any experience ever talking about these issues before is a real problem in the UK. So I think the big thing is arguably getting in front of the same people that they're getting in front of and speaking to them and being like, look, this is actually my lived experience. It's not something I've fantasized about and feared about for years. It's I've actually gone through these issues and I know what I'm talking about. And getting a wide range of trans people or very trans adjacent, i.e. partners, family members who are supportive and knowledgeable, to talk to these people and explain the actual issues that this country is facing rather than hypotheticals that don't exist. I think that we need to try and organize ourselves, and it's tough because there are a lot of us, but it can be hard to be publicly out, especially in the current climate. So it's supporting the people who do decide to be publicly out, in making their voices heard, and then supporting the people who decide that's not for me, I don't want to be very public about it, I prefer my private life, and making sure that they get the best possible experience as a result. And kind of using our networks to voice our biggest issues and try and get them solved, and then tackling the other smaller issues and almost kind of ignoring what they're saying, because they're saying nonsense. And if we put too much energy into that, we're never going to solve our actual problems. And I think, yeah, refunneling our energy is, I'd say, our biggest strength, if we can manage to do that.
Wonderful. Yeah. Danny, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think what Dara said there is so important, is that the way of fighting it is through visibility, and it is through positivity, because hate remains to be the minority. Hatred in this country is always in the minority. I think I remain optimistic forever in these topics. As somebody who is very publicly visible, you know, I do my fair share of media stuff and campaigning and all of that. It can be really tough, and something that I realized early on was that nobody's mind was ever being changed on Twitter. Nobody's mind was ever being changed when somebody's waving a pick-up board in your face as you walk past them at the Pride Parade. You know, like, that's trying to shout back at them does not change anything. So the best thing that we can do is be positive role models, put ourselves in the right places, and use our voices accordingly. I spend quite a lot of my own time working with the charity. I spend a lot of my time going into companies and doing diversity training, and I do a lot of diversity stuff on a big corporate level. And the main lesson I always ask everybody to take away from that is take the message that you got from today and carry that on to the people that you love, your peers, your family, your friends, because I think that's where real change is going to happen. You know, we obviously carry this burden of being a voice of the community per se, but the change will come from non-threatening voices. And so if we're putting ourselves out there and educating people in a friendly, relatable, engaging way, they're going to pass that message on to the people that they care about and who care about them. And that's where the change will creep in slowly. I make the comparison a lot of the kind of gay turning point in the late 90s, early noughties, where Queer as Folk was on Channel 4 and people started to realize that gays were everywhere, you know. And although we are certainly not everywhere, we do remain to be the unicorns of the country. We're gaining that same level of visibility right now that allows people to remember our humanity, and that we're not these kind of lurking figures in the bathrooms that are gonna steal their kids and husbands. You know, I think that it's the visibility and the relatability that's going to be the best way to kind of get our point across.
Yeah, amazing cat, by the way. Love that. Yeah, I think I definitely share your belief there, and when it comes to, from my perspective, when it comes to looking at fighting transphobia in the UK, I definitely come at it from a historical perspective. And when you look at the fight for gay rights and respect, you know, from the 90s onwards in particular, what you see is that homophobia became an impermissible position to hold. It became a gauche, kind of gross view to have, which of course it is. And I think where I come at it, from my point of view, is that a lot of the work needs to be done by cis people and cis allies. You know, you very often, as a trans feminine person, you find yourself in a massive bind when kind of fighting transphobia, because you either stay silent and it continues, or you are vocal and then that is used against you. You know, we're fighting against very organized, very well paid, very well connected organizations that appear really milquetoast and just like that, or they're just concerned citizens. And from my point of view, that this is the thing, is like homophobia didn't become impermissible in society until the majority of straight people considered it a gauche opinion to have and considered it an impermissible thing to have. And the trans community has always lagged behind by 10, 15, 20 years in terms of where we're at in society. And that's the thing. We need cis allies to go to bat for us. We need cis people to step up and go, no, actually, that's not okay. Actually, no, that's the thing. Because as trans people arguing for our own existence, we've got skin in the game, and that is something that's not respected. This is the thing that I constantly see in discussions about trans people. Whenever you see, and this is a really fun game you all can play at home, folks, is next time you see a trans person on the news, it does happen occasionally, they will inevitably be labeled, whether it's, any us three or an average Joe, whether it's, India Willoughby or whether it's Monroe Bergdorf, they're always stated to be a trans activist as opposed to a trans person. And that's the thing in terms of the perception, in terms of where we're at, our basic humanity is ignored. And you're seeing a series of organizations that are just leavering. And don't get me wrong, like when they're done with us, they won't stop. They will come for lesbians. They will come for gay men. They will come for bisexuals. We are the canary in the coal mine. Simple as, so we need cis folks to step up. We need cis folks to learn what's going on, to pay attention to what's going on. I did a talk a couple of weeks ago where I discussed the history of transphobia, and I talked about dog whistles, and it's something you very much touched on there, Danny, where you were talking about sort of, and I think Darry, you mentioned it as well loosely, which is like very often we find ourselves in these situations where there's a newspaper story that is like, well, trans folks are demanding this. And it's, everyone remembers, like, there was the like Mr. Potato Head is trans thing. And there's like, there was a trans chocolate bar story. And like, these news stories are like maximum ridiculosity. That's the term I like to use, because what it is it's going, trans people want Mr. Potato Head to be trans. No, we don't. We don't give one iota of a crap about Mr. Potato Head's gender. But whilst we're arguing that that's not something we care about, we're not arguing about high suicide rates in the trans community. We're not arguing about high unemployment. We're not arguing about a lack of healthcare provision. We're unable to argue about the things that really matter. And whilst we have a media that is against us, because they are against us, like, let's not forget, and I'm going to quote it again, we are up against people who want to morally mandate us out of existence. We are facing people who wish that we didn't exist, who want all three of us and everyone else who is transgender to cease to be. It's as simple as that. And that's why we can't do this alone. We need help. We need cis people to step up and come to bat. And I'm sorry if that comes across at all blunt, but we're all scared. We're terrified. Yeah, that's simply where it's at.
I think that the media cases that you mentioned as well, they more often or not have chosen to debate topics that there will never be an answer for. When you talk about trans kids, when you talk about trans people in competitive sport and trans people in prison or public bathrooms, there's never going to be a solution to this conversation where both sides of the conversation are satisfied. It's never going to end. And so what I find happens with the media stuff is that they use these conversations to distract people from the issues that are really taking place, because the amount of activists that I know that don't care about these topics anymore because they want to get on with the real work, it's just distracting, and it's so counterproductive, and but it's the only thing that sells the newspapers and creates the clicks. It's clickbait.
Absolutely. And I think that's something else that I like to talk about, which is like, it's never about the thing that they say it's about. It's never about trans people using the bathroom. It's about preventing trans people from being able to live a public life. It's never about trans people playing sport and fairness in sport. It's about preventing trans people having hobbies. They don't want us to leave the house. They just want us to just cease to be in public and cease to exist. That's the thing. There's always the undercurrent. There's always a message underneath that sneaks in there. Yeah, bang on. Darry, anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a bit about as well, like acknowledging that a lot of it is trans misogyny, because like if I respond to someone on Twitter, they'll immediately, even though it's like in my bio and everywhere that I am a trans guy, they will assume I am a trans woman and get it like and say you'll never be a real woman, and it's like, great, thank you, yeah, that's exactly my point. But it just shows that like trans men are confused little girls, and that's misogyny, and trans women are predators, and that is trans misogyny, and it's all of the roots come back to misogyny. So we've got to acknowledge that and make sure that we aren't like feeding into that misogyny, though. So trans guys can't like put on toxic masculinity just because it makes us more accepted. We need to make sure that we're supporting like the taking down of the patriarchy, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very complicated thing. How do we fight transphobia in the UK? It's a big ball. A lot of this stuff is very entrenched, and a lot of this involves power systems that we don't have access to. I think something else that I always talk about when I discuss these things is that if you look at how trans issues are framed in the media, it's very often framed as a war or a debate or a discussion. Now, there is no war because a war implies two equivalent sides that are flexing power in order to demonstrate domination over each other. Now, trans people aren't seeking domination over each other. We just want to exist, and we have no power. You know, there are various people who I probably shouldn't name for legal reasons who, you know, get an event cancelled and then go on a mass tour of the Guardian and the Times and newspapers and magazines and claim they're being silenced. I'm being silenced, they shout into a megaphone, basically, getting printed in the Guardian and the Times and all the other media places. Meanwhile, trans people have no voice, very little voice at least. I mean, you know, the Guardian, for example, you know, it's a massively leftist newspaper. The Guardian US wrote a letter to the UK Guardian office asking them to fix their transphobia issue. It's bananas. It's completely bananas. And yeah, you know, I think it is a massive ball to untangle. It's a massive, complicated, thorny thing. But I think one of the key things to understand is there is no war. There can be no debate. Because when you have a debate and one side is discussing its right to continue to exist, and one side is trying to say the other side shouldn't, that's not a debate. When one side has power and the other does not, that is not a fair, equivalent discussion. That is not a good discourse. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting really like passionate and angry and upset and sad, and I just hope I'm not rambling too much. Someone else want to take the mic from me? No, we're good. Oh, we've got a comment here. We've got Miles here in the comment saying we also need to avoid being complicit in pink washing. So that's use of corporations making use of LGBTQIA organizations by legitimizing a transphobic organization. Transphobia is not transphobia. I think I know what you're alluding to, and it is something that I do want to discuss further. Got something later that kind of brings that in. The next question, which actually harkens onto the idea of pink washing and connects perfect, brilliant segue, is how does the commercialization of pride affect the trans community? I've not gone first yet, so I'll go first and then I'll stop talking. So it's a weird one because, you know, as I mentioned at the start, our unemployment rate is 3 times that of the national average. We are 3 times more likely to be unemployed and therefore not in receipt of money, generally speaking, which makes us less of a hot commodity for organizations that wish to get that money. Basically, that's what you're seeing. I mean, I've seen a wide amount of discourse about pink washing this year. I've seen a massive amount of talking about all of the organizations that change their flags, their logos to pride flags and so on and so forth. I think the weirdest one was Raytheon Industries changed its logo to a pride flag. They make, if I'm correct, they're like an arms company that builds missile guidance systems. But they changed their logo to a rainbow flag. So, you know, yeah. We have less money, therefore we are less of a commodity. So to a degree, we are less affected by the commercialization of pride directly. However, on the other hand, we are a part of the community that is still very much requiring pride to be a protest rather than a party. which is generally how prides have become in recent years. You know, it is a really common thing if you go to a pride that you end up having a chat with someone and they're like, oh yeah, but everything's okay now, isn't it? And then you list off all the ways in which things are not okay, and then it gets really awkward. So we need pride to be a protest, and there are large organizations, corporations that want it to be a party because they can market a party. Can't really market a protest very easily, particularly not when you're engaged in continuing on the issues that are happening. So, you know, I see it all the time with the various corporations that are like, oh, you know, we support the trans community. Do you? How? Tell me, how do you? Like, you know, do you recognize non-binary identities when it comes to your data forms? You know, do you support people being able to change their name through a deed poll? Very often you find they don't. Do you have appropriate training for your staff in how to deal with transgender customers in a polite manner? Very often they don't. You know, it's like, yeah, let's just stick a rainbow on it and we're done. But it needs more than that. That's my take, at least. One of you two want to jump in?
Sure. I've done a ton of partnerships for the charity over the last 2 months, all relating really to Pride Month. And as a result, I've had a ton of conversations about this and had lots of people talk to me about pink washing or rainbow washing or however else it's worded. And I think that it's two sides of the same coin, because I can see the argument in saying to companies, well, you know, you don't support us all year round, so why do you support us for Pride Month? But then I also see the side of it that is, it was within our lifetime that you could be fired for being gay or being openly trans, or you know, and legally so. And so now to see this turning point where companies are, even if in only a small part, trying to be more progressive and I ask a lot of the brands that we work with to do the work as well. I ask them about their onboarding process. How do they retain LGBTQ employees, specifically trans employees, because it's what I talk to them about. And I do believe that companies now are at a reckoning point where they say, we are not doing good enough, and we didn't know we weren't doing good enough, but now we want to do better. And progress is progress. And so I welcome companies, change your logo to the rainbow. If you want to do it, do it. But the only thing that I struggle with is product sales. I don't like product sales unless at least 50% goes to a queer organization, whether that's gay, trans, unanimous, whatever it is. I believe that at least 50% of the proceeds should be donated and paid forward, because if you are going to benefit from us, then you should pay it to us, you know. And I've worked with some really fantastic brands that have done 100%, or, you know, whatever it is. Like there's good brands doing good work. And then I've also told quite a few brands where to go when the offer has been minimal. I had quite a big bed linen company offer us 1% of their proceeds from one product for the month of June, so they could use our logo. And I've had a few run-ins like that. I actually had a high street fast fashion clothes company do something very similar. But then it's my job to go in and say, no, that's not right. And this is why. I don't demonize them. I just tell them that we don't want your 5%. That's not how this works. You don't have access to our flag, to our people, to you can't market to us and not pay it forwards. So yeah, with the whole rainbow thing and pink washing thing, I see the benefit in it. To be honest, I love the rainbow flag. I love all of our flags. I love seeing them everywhere. I like seeing the limited edition trainers. I like seeing the company logos. I like seeing the flags in the window. I think it's lovely. I think it's a really
I think that we're so lucky to live in a country where companies are prepared to do that. You know, there are so many countries around the world. Look at what happened in Georgia a couple of weeks ago. A balcony, the flag on the balcony of their only LGBT organization. They jump up there, rip it up, throw it into the streets. People getting beaten in the streets. And we live in a country where there's a rainbow flag in almost every window for a month of the year. You know, like I say, progress is progress, and I do remain optimistic with it. I think companies need to be mentored. That's what needs to happen. I think companies and corporations just need mentorship and guidance of what is appropriate, because and that's getting better. And I believe that that's with, sorry, I'm rambling now. I believe I remain optimistic also about this next generation, Gen Z. You know, we demonize them a lot, but what I found really inspiring about having dealings with them is that millennials and further back, we ask for change. You know, we go into situations and we ask for change. This next generation does not ask. They tell you, they demand it, and they shout it from the rooftops. They make it happen. And so now when I see companies getting it wrong, I haven't even managed to look at the comments before I've seen the news report that people are going off at these companies, you know. So we're creating positive change. Companies are trying to be better for the most part, I believe. But it just takes guidance. You know, we can't jump down people's throats when they get it wrong the first time. We have to coach them through it, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like majority of your points, and I agree, especially on the product point. I hate when people do products and then don't give anything back or give very little back, because it's like, what was the point? You're not actually supporting anyone. So it's nice to see, like, one of the YouTubers that I watch did 150%, where they gave all of the proceeds and then donated half of the another half of the proceeds, and that was brilliant to see. And so yeah, products also make me feel a bit grim. Regarding commercialization of Pride, I like seeing the rainbows everywhere as well. It makes me feel like it's okay, because like I think if it didn't happen ever, I feel like I'd be quite upset, because it'd be like that there's no support for me. But at least when people change their logos, it is somewhat solidarity, like we support you, as long as they are showing it in other ways as well. I'm not the biggest fan of a commercialized Pride. I think Pride is a protest, and I don't like party prides. And I don't like it when people charge lots of money for Pride either, because I think it cuts out the people that most need Pride, because poor people need Pride more, or are often more discriminated against, because intersectionality works like that. So poorer people tend to experience discrimination more because they're going for low wage jobs, and low wage jobs tend to be not great companies, and not great companies tend to have transphobia in them. And I think that it's important to make sure that Pride is accessible to everyone, so that no one feels like, oh, I'm too poor to be prideful of myself. And I also think that it upsets me when I see Pride parades that are primarily companies. Some of my favorite Pride parades have maybe a few companies at the front to like fund their parade, because they need to pay to get the street cordoned off or whatever, and then they let everyone else march as well. And I think that's the best bit of the Pride marches, when everyone's marching together and everyone can raise their flags. And it's actually, I know, because I helped plan the questions, I know what the next question is, so I won't say this next point, I'll save it. But yeah.
I think something's happening with your microphone. It's flicking. There we go. I forgot to mention about the Prides getting sponsored. Couldn't agree more with Dara. The thing that angers me the most is when I see cities adopting a paid ticket Pride. I think it absolutely eradicates the entire reason that it's there to be had. I'm not opposed to a party pride, but it should be a party that's open to everybody. And if it's going to be a celebration, then it should be a celebration that everybody is included in, and one that's put in a way that is accessible to everybody. Because I've seen quite a lot of the pride celebrations go on around the country where they're not accessible to all people of all able. Sorry, I think my words are like escaping me today. I'm very tired. People of all abilities. That was what I was going to say. I was going to say all ableisms. Yeah, I think that the pride celebrations that happen should they shouldn't ever be something you pay to get into. And if a headline act can't be funded from fundraisers that they run throughout the year, then they shouldn't be booked. I don't care about seeing Ariana Grande perform on stage if it means that people can't come and enjoy Pride.
I think agreed, absolutely. I just kind of want to bring it back to companies are showing solidarity, and they're showing solidarity because they want our money. They're showing solidarity because it's profitable. If you look at Sony, for example, Sony PlayStation, they changed their logo to a pride flag in all countries, apart from the ones where it wasn't profitable. That speaks to me as it's profitable. That this is the thing. I think it's really important for us to not forget that ultimately corporations do not care about us. There may be people within those organizations who care about us, but as a grand thing, they don't. That's simple as, like, their motive is profit. And if it's profitable for them to put rainbow flags in their windows, they'll do it, ultimately.
Yeah, I do think it's important that if a company does change their logo to a rainbow, that their values reflect that throughout the year. Like, it's okay to not have it all year round, but your values need to remain the same. You can't just do it for a month and then do loads of things that are very anti-trans, anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ in general, and then come back the next year and be like, yes, we are supporting the gays, and when in reality they are not. But I don't have a problem with companies that have good policies in place, do training, etc. I don't mind them using the rainbow flag during Pride Month to kind of show that they are there for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, for the trans community, there are still banks that will not accept a deed poll and will not allow you to use gender neutral prefixes. There are, and this is the thing, is these things are an opportunity to hold organizations to account. This is an opportunity to go, actually, no, you know what, if you want to be involved, this is what you need to do. And that doesn't happen a lot of the time. I mean, you only have to look at the biggest example of a commercialized pride is London Pride, probably one of the top 3 largest prides in the UK. And look at the secession from London Pride of UK Black Pride. Look at the secession of trans pride from London Pride. Look at the issues that have happened there because they've chased the pound. There is so much corporation money that's come into that they've lost sight of the parts of the community that need help the most, in terms of the Black community, people of color, in terms of the trans community. I mean, I still have not forgotten that it was only 4 or 5 years ago that the organizers of London Pride let TERF stand on that rainbow flag and stand at the front of the parade. I
don't think that they let them. They infiltrated the parade, and it wasn't dealt with quickly enough, I think, was the issue.
To my knowledge, they did stand in front of the parade the entire way.
Okay. So I was at that pride. I was there. From the reports and from what I saw, it was that they refused to move and they didn't get the police involved quick enough. Yeah. But I do think that is an issue. That should have been, they should have made sure that they were removed. but also like they didn't plan for them to be there.
Of course they didn't. No.
I think that there are definitely structural inequalities that have taken place within the Pride in London organisation. I absolutely do. I'm involved kind of with the Pride in London team. I'm also heavily involved with London Trans Pride and the organisers of that. And I think that there is a happy medium between the Pride in London lot and the Trans Pride in London, the Trans Pride London team. Trans Pride London have been going for a few years now, and they have to run a GoFundMe once a year to try and cover the costs of their medics and their translators, because they will not bring in any corporate money. But because of it, they're left in a situation where they're scraping money together all the time. And I think, and also because of that, they can't provide certain things that other Pride organisations can, because those Pride organisations have utilised responsible corporate donations. And so I certainly don't think that there needs to be a price put on Pride, but I don't see harm in if you are being ethical about the companies that you allow to sponsor it. I think that it can only be a good thing if it allows that event to become more successful, to grow more, to be available to more people. Pride in London it's like the opening of an envelope, anybody can get to it, in terms of just putting some money down and your logo is everywhere. But I think that I hope that what other Pride organisations such as London Trans Pride will do is slowly integrate those corporate sponsorships that will allow them to become better and safer for everybody, because some of the practices are left as if it's an impromptu protest, and it doesn't need to be.
That's fair. Dara, anything to add?
Yeah, I also just want to say it gives them more energy to do what they need to do as well, because if they're spending so much time trying to fundraise, they don't have as much energy on the actual event. And so like ethical like corporate sponsorships or companies doing something to fundraise for them, or whatever option they decide to go for, can give their volunteers or their employees or whichever route they decide to go down more opportunity to spend time on the actual event rather than filling out application form after application form, because that can be draining.
Okay, we've got two more questions. One of them is, again, a heavy one, and then there is a lovely light and fluffy one. So starting out, let's go with Dara. The question is, how can we fight against trans people experiencing bigotry at Pride?
Yeah, sorry, I write things down because otherwise I get off track of my thoughts.
Entirely fine, however you work.
So the massive thing about transphobia at Pride is that it's often, at least in my experience, is kind of the secondary thing in the prides that I've experienced, and it kind of needs to be more organizational and like a forefront focus. Like I've found that they'll start planning an event and then 6 weeks down the line they'll go, oh wait, what can we do to avoid transphobia? And that's when holes kind of fall into their plans, because they haven't gone, okay, so one of the big issues we faced last year was transphobia. How can we make sure that doesn't happen again? And I think actually the big example of this is London Pride, because they did manage to not have someone march the parade again at the front, which was great. And loads of people were wearing trans flags as like kind of solidarity support, or they were trans organizations. But there was still quite a lot of like church preachers and stuff that were very close to the parade. And it's how do you make sure that those are kind of kept away so that people don't have to experience that? That's both transphobia and normal LGBTQ plus phobia of any sort. But like, how do you go in as an organization and go, one of the big things our community faces is phobia and bigotry. How do we stop that from happening? Okay, then let's go on to the rest of our event. What do we actually want to see? Like what kind of people, what organizations do we want marching? Which performers do you want? That should, in my opinion, come slightly secondary to actually keeping people safe and happy and able to attend.
Danny, do you want to go?
I'm just sitting here nodding away at Dara. I'm like, you're a little rock star. I love it. No, I completely agree. I think it starts at the beginning. Also, I think that what needs to be addressed in the organising bodies of these events is there needs to be trans representation in the organising bodies of each of them. And that way, they don't have anything to apologise for when it comes down to how poorly they've been organised surrounding trans-related issues. So I think having correct representation of what our beautiful community actually looks like, rather than it being a board of cis white gay men, then that might help in the planning stages of it anyway. And then, as Dara said, I think then it just comes down to planning how you keep everybody safe. Everybody's safe. Everyone should be safe at Pride. So, you know, what security measures have you got in place? How are you working with local law enforcement if need be? What companies are there? Yeah, I think it's. I'm just sat here agreeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of how do we fight trans people experience of bigotry. You're bang on there, Dara. Like, it's a basic safety issue a lot of the time. You know, yeah, it just comes down to basic safety. I think when it comes to it, it can be a difficult one as well. It's, you know, a question of also what organizations you opt to work with as well. It can be difficult, and I think it's important to make sure you don't link up with organizations that hold transphobic views or shelter transphobic people, because that's just going to put you on a collision course, basically, where you're going to put trans people who are coming to that and thinking there is an air of legitimacy because it's got your Pride's logo on it. And then it turning out that there are people, you know, within that organization who would wish the community harm. It is, first and foremost, a safety issue. Absolutely. Yeah, I haven't really got anything else to add, to be honest.
I also just want to quickly add that I want to acknowledge that it's difficult and that people will make mistakes and occasionally things will slip through the cracks. Like, it's not easy to go through everyone who's coming's Twitter feed to make sure they're not transphobic, and accidentally letting in one transphobic person, as long as you deal with it correctly, it will happen. It's not an easy process.
Absolutely.
It's just making sure that you have the processes in place and that you're thinking about, how do I deal with it if it does happen?
Absolutely. And I think also, you know, having zero tolerance policies on all kinds of bigotry, whether that's, you know, homophobia, racism, sexism, ableism, having a real zero tolerance approach to that, going, no, that's it. Oof, you're gone. That's really important. I mean, I think pretty sure Suffolk Pride has such things in place, which is great to see. Yeah. Are we ready for the fluffy question? Okay. What is your favorite thing about the trans community, and what gives you hope? Anyone want to grab that hot potato?
I would say my favorite thing I was actually talking about this on a call earlier on, is I think that the reason trans people are so wonderful is the fact that by nature we are fighters. We had to every single part of who we are was thought through and fought for, and with us being natural fighters, we are naturally resilient in a sense. I think that we're people who fought for our identity. And so my favorite thing about the community, I love strong people, strong women, strong men, strong non-binary people. I love strength, and I just think that our community is so rich in it, as well as being so rich in talent and just vibrancy. I just think, like, I'm so proud to be a trans person. I'm so glad that I get to have our flag and work with the people that I do. I just think that it's just I just think it's the best community. It makes me really emotional because I love being a part of it. I wish that I hadn't wasted my hope question earlier on in saying that the next generation gives me hope, because it's for the same reason. And I really do. A lot of people, I think a lot of the time we make the mistake of saying, oh, the next generation got it so easy. They've got no problems, you know, like they're so clued up. And that's not the case. It's really not. But one thing they are is they have access to a lot more resources than we do. They have access to a lot more positive representation than we did. And I think that as a result of that, it's a real generation of like strength. And it fills me with hope to see what's going to come next.
All right, I'll go next. I think I want to echo that I really love and I'm really proud of the resilience that this community has. And it's really inspiring. Like the way I get up in the morning is I look and see what other people are doing, and that gives me like hope and strength. And I have like posters on the wall behind me that a trans artist has designed that kind of echo the values I want to live by, and it's really nice to be able to wake up in the morning and see those and be like, the person who made those understands and is uplifting me every time I look at it. I really love like the support that we give each other. Not every trans person is going to like every trans person. I do want to put that disclaimer in place, but as a community, we are so like supportive of each other. We give each other advice. There are countless groups that I'm in that will answer people's questions about the NHS, or about even like, when can I go swimming after top surgery? And like, it's just so nice to see people support each other in that situation, because we've all gone through it, and most people are very happy to like support each other in that environment. And then the thing I am most hopeful about is I am very, very hopeful that using the kind of like the media that we have access to today, that we're going to see very soon, probably in the next 10 years, a real shift. And I'm really hopeful that that happens, because I think getting people on the screen that they don't expect, because trans people have always been the butt of the joke that they don't pass, or they don't look trans, or well, they look cis and they're pretending. So it's really nice when you see a trans person who just sits very comfortably in their skin and presents however they want to present, and is confident about it, and isn't what people expect, and is like, it makes me really hopeful that we'll see more of that in the future.
And to round it off, I think my favorite thing about the trans community is, I think it's the amount that we give to one another. We know that we're up against it. We know that we're having difficulties, but you know, as a trans person, I think we'd all give each other our last Rolo. You know, I see like, you know, trans crowdfunders on Twitter, and I see, you know, people who don't know each other from Adam just saying, checking in, making sure they're okay, and donating their last, you know, what little they have. We don't have a lot to give a lot of the time, but what we do give is greatly appreciated and valued. And I see trans people giving so much of what they have, and it's heartening. And I guess that brings it into what gives me hope, which is, you know, over the last few years, we've been slandered. We've been called cockroaches in the Houses of Parliament. You know, we've been compared to Nazis on BBC television, prime time. We've been the butt of 1,000 jokes. We've survived it because we've got each other. And that's the thing. We all look out for one another. And that's what will get us through this ultimately. I don't know what happens next. I don't know what being trans will look like in 2, 5, 10 years' time. I hope it will be better. My activism has always been based on the idea of making things better for the people who come out after me, so they don't have to deal with what I have to deal with, in the same way that I don't have to deal with what people before me had to deal with. And I think what gives me hope is the fact that we've got through this. What I really want to happen is to make sure as many of us are able to get through this as possible. And I think it's through organizing, through reaching out, through looking after each other in every way we can, that happens. That is the end of the question section, the structured question section. What we're going to do, I think we're going to have a wee break, possibly a wee break. I'm going to go have a glass of water. It is 7:15 now. I'm going to suggest that we recommence at 25 past. Is that okay with everybody? Is that enough time to go and make yourself a cup of tea and have a quick cigarette or whatever you need to do? Perhaps, take the cat for a quick walk. And we'll see you back here when we will have a Q&A session. We'll be taking everybody's questions, which should be very interesting, I expect. So for now, lovely, delightful audience, hold that thought, and we'll be back in 10 minutes.
Cool. From a tech perspective, I just want to say you can start submitting questions now. Like, you don't have to wait for the 10 minutes to be over.
If you're happy to ask the question publicly in the chat, you can put it in the chat, or you can direct message Dara or myself, and we'll take it from there. So my DMs, as always, are open. Hello. I hope we're all feeling suitably refreshed and are sitting comfortably. Just wait for Danny to get back, and then we'll crack on.
Oh, I've been here the whole time. Sorry, I was replying to a text.
Oh. You can never tell with Zoom, can you? That's the thing. It's like, cool. So we've had a few questions come down. I've got one here, an anonymous question. So yes, start with that one. So the question reads, given the benefit of having knowledgeable elected officials, how do we highlight good practice and bad practice without ending up being party political? It can sometimes be hard to know which local parties are trans inclusive and which ones aren't. So any thoughts on that?
It's hard. First and foremost, it is a difficult question, like a difficult situation to try and figure out. And I think it's true that like it's not really party specific in the UK anyway, let alone it shouldn't be anyway. And it's hard to figure out who's trans inclusive and who's not, what's good practice, what's bad practice. And I think the first steps is kind of looking at who's put themselves forward to be elected. What have they done in the past? Have they ever, if they've made mistakes, have they ever acknowledged those as mistakes, or did they kind of double down? If not, there might be the better candidate. But it's also important, like, to recognize that people are human and have different opinions on different subjects and aren't necessarily perfect, and that education is important. So we have to kind of look at them as a whole being, as well as their views on transgender people, non-binary people, LGBTQ plus people. Like, if they're not the most advanced, like they're not necessarily campaigning to have gender neutral toilets in every building, but they are supportive, even if they've never, like, they've voted for any positive motions that have been put forward, stuff like that. And you agree with their points on other issues, then it's a case of getting in contact with them, speaking with them, educating them a little bit, being like, how can you support me if I vote for you? And then taking that from there, that discussion. It has to be a bit more individualized. Unfortunately, we're not very, there's no overall good practice at the moment because they're all a bit rubbish.
Yeah, hard agree on that one. It's really tricky, you know. When I first took on the charities have to remain apolitical. We can't align ourselves with one side or the other. And when I first kind of was wrapping my brain around that, I thought, well, how am I the anti-Tory person that I am? How am I going to align myself with that? And then I took on legal advice from the people who represent us, and they said, well, you need to get these people on side because they're the ones that will create the change. Just because they're not in a great position now, that means that they can be in a better position from your alliance if you attempt to get wider education for them. It's hard, I think, when you talk about local candidates, because I mean, as Dara said, there are anti-trans people in the Labour Party and the Lib Dem Party, as much as there are in the Tories. So you can't, it's also about what they represent. It's a really, really grey area, and I can't really decipher how I feel about it, because you do want to take your local candidate at face value and what they've done on a personal level, but they also represent a real big structure of inequality. It's a sad state of affairs, because I think a lot of politics now is a 2-horse race, regardless of anything. It used to be a 3-horse race, and now it's a 2-horse race. So you kind of have to choose between 2 people in most cases, and so it's kind of a case of
of choosing the lesser evil, which is really sad, really. I think that there's a lot of performative stuff that happens on the politics side of the left as well. And I don't necessarily think there's a lot of follow through when it comes to LGBT rights. I think there's quite a lot of utilization of queer representation and not a lot of follow through. I'm on the roundtable meetings for Sadiq Khan. And when I was first asked to be on that, I was really honoured. And I was like, wow, I'm on the red table for, the round table for Sadiq Khan. I'm in this advisory group. This is going to be fantastic. And then I started speaking to friends of mine and they were like, yeah, but he hasn't actually done anything for us. Like he says he does, and he says he stands with us, but he hasn't done a great deal. And then I started picking apart and I was like, oh God, am I now part of the problem? And I've bought into all of this performative stuff. I think politics is a really, really tricky one when it comes down to identity. I really do. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I mean, all the major parties that we have in the UK seem to really be permanently headbutting that incredibly low bar, basically. It's just like, and you can totally see why, because you have print media that is, and media in general, is completely obsessed with us and how we're all evil and transing the children, and we are, you know, all predators and disgusting and perverts, and, you know, and they're going, oh, because the thing is, like, you know, transphobes are a minority, but they're a vocal minority. And I can see why, you know, politicians are like, oh, it's a bit of a contentious issue, that is, especially as, you know, trans people aren't really a voting bloc. You're not going to court our vote, are you? You know, so, and, you know, and as you both alluded to, you know, there's a lot of talk and not much actual go, not much actual action. And that's a really tricky thing. So in terms of sort of highlighting the good practice and the bad practice without being party political, is I think it's pretty easy to be a party apolitical about it, because they're all pretty damn terrible at it. There's very little action, and, you know, it's the issue, you know, there's such a lack of awareness of the issues, you know. I mean, I'm yet to see anyone really do like a gotcha question, but whenever there's any politician who talks about, you know, we support the community, and it's like, I'm waiting for someone to go, yeah, so how do you feel about spousal veto? Or, you know, how do you feel about, you know, puberty blockers being unavailable to people, to trans kids who are already on them? Or how do you feel about, you know, the unemployment rate being 3 times higher than the national average? I'm yet to see that happen. I don't know whether it will happen. We've got another question here, sort of leading on from that here. On this topic, do you feel encouraged by Lord Herbert being the LGBT envoy and chair of the College of Policing? He has pro-trans stuff all over his site. Would be interested to hear what you think of him. Anybody? I don't know much about this particular story.
No,
I mean,
Yeah, unfortunately, no clue. I'm having a quick Google.
it sounds like a step forward. I mean, obviously, historically and even present day, like, you know, trans engagement with the police is contentious. A lot of people have had null, if not negative, experiences of interactions with the police. That very much colours a lot of people's opinions. I mean, one of the most common things I kind of hear when it comes to like reporting hate crime is, well, what they're going to do seems pretty pointless, you know. I know that's a really common kind of point of view. And I mean, Stella, who asked the question, we sat and had a coffee and chat about things, and actually, you know, it does seem like there is a will to do things, but often they are kind of hamstrung about how much they can talk about in terms of what they do operationally. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like a step forward. Lord Herbert being the LGBT envoy and chair of the College of Policing. sounds like a step forward, but I don't really know. I shall have to. I'll be straight onto theyworkforyou.com and looking up what his voting record is afterwards. Like, devil lies in the details.
And I quickly want to draw on the point that you raised about like they're kind of like pigeonholed and how much they can talk about these issues, because the whip is a powerful thing. Even if someone wants to vote against it, if they're threatened to lose their job, they have to make a really difficult choice. And like and if they make that choice, it shows how powerful of a supporter they are, no doubt. But it's when it's your livelihood, it can be quite hard to go all out on one point when you could vote in negatively in that one but make it up in a different way. And so like just having a negative voting record doesn't mean they don't support. It just means they're not confident enough to support it so vocally that they're willing to disassociate from their party politics.
It's a complicated game, like naturally, you know. Yeah, it's a good place to start though. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, so we had one earlier about cervical screenings.
Okay, cool. That was from Helen, right?
Yes, so she works as a clinical lead for cervical screening project across Suffolk, and would like to know how she can support anyone that's having a screening. So I assume for trans men, because I did some Googling, and trans women usually don't need to have a surgical screening, even if they have a neocervix.
Yep.
But we do get the letters reminding us that we do need them quite regularly.
Exactly what I was about to say. I think that's probably the biggest thing you can do for the trans community as regards cervical screening, would be making sure that the people who need the letters actually get them. Because I know I get the cervical screening ones. I know trans masculine friends of mine get the ones for prostate exams, and the reaction is the same, which is, I mean, you can have a go, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to, no. So I think that's one of the biggest things there. Vis-a-vis what you can do practically for trans masculine or non-binary people who have cervixes, what you can do, I mean, that's not something that I can speak to personally, but certainly I could probably put you in touch with some people. It's certainly something that I'm sure Suffolk Pride could ask for some voluntary people to get engaged. You know, I think it's really, really good to see you asking that question. And yeah, excellent.
I can answer a little bit. Full disclaimer, I haven't had a cervical screening because I'm not 25 yet, so I haven't been invited to have one. But I think also acknowledging the elephant in the room can be quite helpful. Like, I understand this is probably going to be uncomfortable. What can I do to make this as easy for you as possible? A couple of the tips I see often posted online is using smaller speculums, or getting the person to like put it in themselves and then like adjusting it afterwards so that there's less touching of the down belows. And like, yeah, kind of acknowledging that it's hard and trying to make them as comfortable as possible is often the hardest step, I think, is like feeling confident to go, and making sure that it's out there that you are supportive and you'll do anything in your power to make people as comfortable as possible is really helpful.
And also, just, you know, I just add to that the just the real basics of having service users who are trans, which is use their pronouns, use their name, and treat them like you would any other service user. I mean, you know, whatever industry you're in, that's pretty much the gold standard right there. There are specifics, as Dara has just stated, but, you know, the real basics are use pronouns, use the name, treat them like any other service user. I think that's what I'd probably say. We've got another question here from Tess, and they say, The panel appears very white presenting, and I wondered if voices from other racial communities are contributing to these discussions.
I can answer a little bit about that. I do want to acknowledge that, yes, this is a very white panel. I did reach out to some other charities that had Black and POC voices, but unfortunately they couldn't be here today. And we do want them as part of the discussion. That's all. I just wanted to say that at the start, so to like acknowledge that, yes, this is not the best representation we could have gotten, unfortunately.
We've got people of colour on our board of trustees, and it's integral to the values of Not Phase. I just tend to do the calls and the Zooms, and I was asked.
Yep. Pretty much everything that was said. You know, there is an intersectionality to this, and very often within the trans community, people that are struggling the most are people of colour, you know, because of institutional racism layered atop of transphobia that exists as well. You know, yeah. And obviously this panel is very white presenting. So it's, yeah, I don't really know what to say other than we're sorry.
I'm going to put in a little plug. We do have a POC and minority communities panel on Tuesday. So there will definitely be voices heard. It's just unfortunately we couldn't get any for this panel. But it's definitely an improvement that we'd look to make for any future events.
So another question here from Miles, and they say, following on from that, given more people live in jurisdictions legally recognise non-binary people than recognise same-sex marriage, social acceptance and the variety of recognised genders varies, is there a more inclusive way to talk about our global community than happens generally? It's a very good question. So that's really interesting. I didn't realise there was more people living in jurisdictions that recognise non-binary people than recognise same-sex marriage. That's pretty cool. Is there a more inclusive way to talk about our global community than happens generally? Absolutely. I mean, you know, when you look at presentation of trans people in general, particularly in the West, it is very much binary, and it is based on a binary understanding of gender identity that is still enshrined in very colonial, very old-fashioned, outdated views and ways of seeing the world. You know, it's a thing that trans people have existed everywhere throughout history. And our experience of gender in the West is not the only way that gender can be perceived. In terms of how we talk about that, I don't know. Is the short answer. Do either Danny or Dara, do you have anything to add there?
I think what that statistic with the more jurisdictions legally recognize non-binary genders and then same-sex marriage makes me both very happy and very sad at the same time. I just want to acknowledge that. Like, I was like, oh, that's really cool, and then I was like, oh, not as great as I'd hoped. But I think one of the major things that the trans community kind of needs to stop doing is looking at non-westernized cultures and going, they have a third gender, because it's often a very different way of interpreting gender than we have. And while, yes, it is, they have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, however many recognized genders, it's not in the same way we recognize gender. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and not use it as like, I often see posts on pages where they're like, this is proof that non-binary has existed for millions and millions of years. And yes, it is proof that there are more genders than what we traditionally present in Western society, it is not the same, and we shouldn't automatically make that connection, and we shouldn't like assume that their understanding of how they present their genders is the same as the way the Western world presents our genders, if that makes sense. That wasn't the most well worded, but
No, absolutely. Danny, anything?
Yeah, it's tricky, especially when we talk about the legal document markers, because I think that especially there's the big court case at the moment happening, isn't there, for the UK to recognise gender marker X, but it's the things that go alongside that we don't have, that are not kind of debated on the world stage, I guess, if you say. It's the same as we talk a lot about in the sessions that I run, how companies over 500 employees have to declare their annual gender pay gap report. And off the back of those reports, a lot of our statistics as a country are built off of the backs of the reports of the gender pay gap reports of how many people are in employment X and Y, you know. And what that tends to do is it leaves a big portion of gender non-conforming and trans people out of the equation, because it forces them to identify in a box that they might not necessarily identify themselves in. And so I've completely lost my train of thought. I literally had it all planned out in my head, sorry. Is there a more positive way that we can talk about this? I'm so sorry, my train, can you literally just remind me of where I was going with that?
Is there a more inclusive way to talk about our global community than happens generally?
Well, yeah, I think that that's a given, isn't it? I don't think that any of the conversations that happen on a greater level are ever truly inclusive at the moment. I think we've got amazing campaigners that are working towards that language change and that difference in the way that we're addressed. And that all starts with the representation that we have in the conversations.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge, like, we're quite lucky in the English language to have they. Like, we are lucky that is a pronoun that people can use. A lot of languages don't have that. And I think that's something that we need to consider as well. Like, I'm not sure if that correlates to which have a legally recognized third gender, but like languages a lot of the time are not built for colonized countries with colonized languages are often not built for a non-binary gender, and it's recognizing that and supporting international non-binary people with that and how they combat that, because we're lucky we don't have to come up with a neo-pronoun that is most commonly accepted, but a lot of countries do, and it's helping them navigate that as well.
That's really interesting, Dara. I've never thought of it like that. Do you mean in terms of the language where everything is based on masculine and feminine as well, like Spanish, French, Italian? Yeah. I've never heard somebody even speak about that before. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like I see it a lot on Twitter because obviously that's how I connect with most people internationally. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how countries that have a language that are quite gendered, or even not, like I'm not sure how gendered Chinese is, but Chinese doesn't. One of the Chinese languages doesn't have a third pronoun that can be used comfortably as a third pronoun. And so they have to come up with their own ways to do it. And it comes in lots of different ways. So in Sweden, I think it is, they recognized a third pronoun internationally. And then in other countries, they've kind of come up with their own way of doing it, but it's not recognized and stuff like that.
So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Got to pick your brain about that at some point. Okay, do we have any further questions? Aware that we're sort of been running for quite a while.
Yeah, so I've got one anonymous one.
Mm-hmm.
That asks, what can you do to protect yourself from discrimination in the workplace before you come out?
find out who your line manager is and who you need to report discrimination to. Look at your company policy when it comes to protected characteristics and find out how you're protected and who you need to speak to.
Join a union.
Old school.
It works. I mean, like, I know unions are not as well attended, perhaps not as kind of common as they used to be, but that commonality does lead to most line managers being somewhat intimidated by them. So if you do have a case where there is something like that, if you're in a union, then that can very much help. Additionally, document everything, absolutely everything, anything that is said, anything that is emailed, anything that is written. Anything, document it all. Unfortunately, workplace discrimination does still happen for trans people. Although we are protected in law, actually being protected is a whole other thing, especially as obviously like there are costs involved, generally speaking, although that is all kind of changing. But yeah, I think that's great advice there from Danny, and I would add join a union. It's just a useful thing to do anyway, to be honest, in terms of resources. It's better to need it and not better have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, I agree. I am not a worker, so I don't experience discrimination in the workplace because I don't have a workplace. But I can kind of speak to it from a university perspective, which is kind of a similar power structure. There's levels, and we have our student union and stuff like that. And I unfortunately at this current point we can't necessarily prevent it. The first time it happens, there's no way to like stop it from happening right at the core, because it will have to happen once for a solution to be put in place. But the best thing to do is get hot on it, and like immediately start making people aware of things if anything happens that makes you uncomfortable, because that's the only way a solution occurs. And as soon as you can get a solution in place, then hopefully that will stop it from happening in the future.
And as Peter has just pointed out in the chat here, so I don't know your pronouns, Peter. What they've said in the chat here is when there are no notes or minutes, you can write an email to them summarising to the manager or other person. Even if they don't reply, at least it's logged. So the way of doing that, generally speaking, in my experience, is to just start the email with the term, following on from our meeting just now, I just wanted to put a few points down, and so on and so forth. Yep. Do we have any other pressing questions from anybody? Anything else? Anybody? Nope. Okay. Well, we're sort of running quite long. Did you have anything else there, Dara?
No, I think I've said my piece.
Okay. You can always drop a message to Suffolk Pride anytime. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I hope it's been educational. Oh, Helen Ellaby says, Dara, please can I contact you? So,
yes, I will drop my university email because that's probably the easiest way to like get me to respond.
Fantastic. Okay, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Dara, for your expert pulling of the internet levers that's made all this happen. Danny, thank you for beaming straight to us all the way from London. I hope it's nice. It looks nice and sunny there. Is it? Yeah.
It's blinding.
Adorable cat as well. I always love seeing pets on Zoom. Always fabulous.
I don't hold you screams, so it's better that he's visible than audible.
I could hear occasionally, and it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Very vocal cat. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
No worries.